Protecting Jayden Daniels is priority number one for the Washington Commanders. And as we enter OTAs this week, that means figuring out who the starting right tackle is before anything else. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to today's episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. I'm David Harrison, beat reporter for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com and WUSA9.com, bringing you insight and analysis every day right here with you on the show 5 days a week. Appreciate all of the everydayers out there who keep coming back and sticking with the show even through the offseason, whether you're in the DMV or you're repping the burgundy and gold anywhere else. I'm glad you're here. If you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening so you don't miss anything going on. If you're tuning in for the first time, thank you for checking it out. Locked On Commanders is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hopefully you'll like what you hear and you'll come back for more. Coming up on today's episode, we're going to kick things off breaking down the right tackle battle that will begin the formation of the offensive line and how it may make or break Jayden Daniels' sophomore season. Then we're going to dive into the defensive line where some fresh faces might shake up the depth chart just a little bit this season. And finally, we're going to take a look at the cornerback rotation and more, an entirely new group playing cornerback for the Commanders in 2025 that we haven't really seen fully just yet. I'll explain. Let's get into it, starting right off the top of the list as we prepare for our first OTA practice on Wednesday of this week. The battle at right tackle is going to be hot, and it could define how well the Commanders can protect Jayden Daniels this season. So the card, the battle, the contenders for the starting right tackle position for the Washington Commanders in 2025, Andrew Wylie versus Josh Conerly Jr. versus Brandon Coleman. It's a three-man death match. Nobody's actually going to die, but it's a three-man positional starting job death match. You got Andrew Wylie, the incumbent starting right tackle from 2024. You got Josh Conerly Jr., the hyped-up newcomer, first-round draft pick. And you got Brandon Coleman, the potential filled offensive tackle, moving from the left side where he was his rookie season in 2024 over to the right side if he wins this competition. Again, looking at the position priority for the group, it's protecting Jayden Daniels, right? You love run blockers. You love no penalties. You love all that stuff. But first and foremost, no matter what else they do on the field, they've got to protect Jayden Daniels. We talked about this during the offseason, during the season even. The Washington Commanders, if you look at their overall offensive line numbers as far as giving up sacks, actually one of the better ones in the league. I think top 10 in giving up sacks last year. However, bottom 10 in giving up pressures. I think they were actually better than top 10, maybe top 5 in sacks. So obviously a lot being done by Jayden Daniels himself. So the idea, get better up front. Jayden doesn't have to do as much protecting himself as much as he can rely on his offensive line to protect him. And of course, you still have that ability, if he needs it, to protect himself as well. So position priority, protecting Jayden Daniels. Clearly the position priority for the entire team this offseason has been protecting Jayden Daniels and or giving him more weapons to operate with. So clearly gunning for Jayden Daniels to take another step forward here in year number 2. So looking at the three combatants here, and you never know, there could be a guy that enters into the picture that we're not even looking at right now as being in this 3-horse race, turn it into a 4, or maybe it stays a 3 and somebody drops out. Who knows? It'll be an interesting offseason. But the three main combatants, Andrew Wylie, last year, 62.1 PFF pass blocking grade, right? We're talking pass blocking because that is the priority here. Allowed 20 pressures according to PFF stat data tracking. That's an average of 1.2 per game because he played 17 games total. That's regular and playoffs. 3 hits given up, 0.2 per game. No sacks credited to Andrew Wylie. I know some of you out there are going to scratch your heads a little bit and say, I don't know about that PFF, but those are the PFF numbers. Brandon Coleman finished his rookie season with a 47.8 PFF pass blocking grade. 28 pressures allowed. That's 1.5 per game. 3 hits, just like Andrew Wylie. It's again 0.2 pressures per game, even though Brandon Coleman actually played 19 games, 2 more than Andrew Wylie was able to in his rookie season. 6 sacks in 19 games credited to Brandon Coleman. That's 0.32 per game, nearly half a sack per game for the rookie. Josh Conerly Jr., he's coming in with an 83.6 PFF pass blocking grade, 9 pressures allowed in 2024. That's 0.6 per game. He played 14 games, gave up 2 hits. That's 0.1 per game, and was credited with giving up 1 sack. So 0.07 sacks per game. Of course, if you're looking at Josh Conerly from a data-driven standpoint, you have to remember that was college. Now, certainly there's some games against guys like Abdul Carter, the number 3 overall pick of the NFL draft this year, going to the New York Giants. I'll see him a couple times a year, depending on what side each of these guys plays on. So certainly there was games against those guys. There were games against Ohio State's JT Tuimoloau, who is now an Indianapolis Colt as a second-round pick. But there were also guys that Josh Conerly went up against in college who are going to play as many NFL games as you and I have. And most of you listening to this, if not all of you, have played exactly as many as I have, and that is 0. So Josh Conerly Jr., again, that grade is great. The stats are great. Got to take it with a grain of salt. That's amateur football. This is pro. So let's make a case for each of these guys to be the starting right tackle, or the leader to be the starting right tackle right now. And ultimately, I think that Josh Conerly Jr. is going to end up with the job. But obviously, that is pure projection, right? Josh Conerly for the starter looks like he's just a more athletic version of an offensive tackle for the Washington Commanders. They love that athleticism. Also, his, I don't want to say lack of size, because he's definitely a big dude, but like, they're talking about, I guess, girth, right? Like his athleticism is great, but also kind of his size does kind of look like, okay, you're probably just going to be a tackle. I don't know. I know there's people that say he has guard versatility. I don't want to take that completely away, but I definitely do see tackle in him. Whether by age or ability, he's just the more athletic of the trio from where I stand right now. The question is going to be, is he strong enough? But if he's questionably strong enough to play outside, then he's going to be questionably strong enough to play inside as well. So that question is not going to go away no matter where you put him. Josh Conerly, entering OTAs, that's probably the best case we can make for him to be the starting right tackle. As far as Andrew Wylie, you're going to lean on experience, right? Experience matters. He's played in Super Bowls. He's played for a lot of good teams. He's played a lot of meaningful football. That absolutely matters. That intelligence, that level of experience completely matters. The question here, he's another year older. That lack of athleticism showed up at times in 2024. I remember watching some tape, watching him try to pull, and he's late just because he can't get there. You know what I mean? Like sometimes he gets there, certainly a serviceable right tackle. I don't think anybody is calling him a snub for all pro necessarily, right? But certainly a serviceable tackle, and you could do a lot worse. But I think when you look at upside, Josh Conerly Jr. clearly has more than Andrew Wylie does at this stage in their careers, respectively. Brandon Coleman, former left tackle, starting left tackle last year. Obviously, Laramie Tunsil, is going to be the left tackle until otherwise told. And when you look at Brandon, anchors well, plays against strength very, very well. Doesn't play with an ego, right? Handle that rotational situation very well all offseason long. I remember watching him in the locker room, picking this guy's brain for advice, when we would sit down and talk, and I would say, hey, I remember this rep against this guy, look to me like this, how did you, when you look back on that, how did that rep kind of sit with you? Very humble guy, very willing to talk, like definitely not sitting there giving him pointers. Don't get it twisted, but very, very humble young man, does not play with a lot of ego. And because of that, you really like the opportunity to kind of see where he fits best. You know that he's going to go out there and give it his best no matter where he goes. The question about him, got beat by some speed in his rookie season, got beat by some games. Defensive coordinators were lining guys up, dropping them out, twisting the guy into replacing all that stuff, doing all those things, trying to mess with his eyes, mess with his ears, get him going one way and bring the pressure from another way. Can he get better there? You saw some of those same problems towards the end of the season as much as you did in the beginning of the season. So that's going to be the big question for Coleman if he's going to stay outside. How much does the future play into this decision in 2025? To me, I don't think the future can really contribute. I think you've got to put your best 5 in the best 5 positions this year. You can't go out there and say, well, this guy's probably the best right tackle in 3 years, so we're going to put him there now, even though he's not the best right tackle now, because that's how you end up with a quarterback that's laying on his back looking up at the roof of the church. So what are we watching for at OTAs? Formation groupings, obviously, right? First time there's an offensive line out there, everybody's be looking at jersey numbers. Who's where? Who's doing what? And then you're looking for rotations. You're looking for guys coming in, coming out, the next set of first teams, et cetera, et cetera. Primary position placements, right? Like Andrew Wylie, when he's not first team right tackle, he's first team right guard, maybe, like those types of things. Eye test in choreography, right? Offensive line play, we've talked about this. It's 5 dudes doing one job. And when you have 5 guys doing one job like that, they've all got to be moving as one. There's choreography with it. How well do they blend together? So we're going to be looking for some of those things as quickly as we possibly can here as OTAs get started this week on Wednesday. So we've covered the right tackle battle, why it matters for Jayden Daniels, pretty clear. Now let's move on to the defensive line, where there's plenty of competition and some surprises that could shake up the group as new players try to earn their spot on a team that darn near made it to the Super Bowl last year. This unit has to hold the line, generate pressure, and they got to do it without a big name pass rusher. That coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Monarch Money, as we break down the Commanders' biggest position battles and watch players compete for roster spots starting in OTAs. It's clear the success comes down to staying organized, focused, and in control on the field or off of it. Managing your money is the same way. Have you ever wondered, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your financing. But Monarch isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center, tracking all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you can stop just managing your money and start building real wealth. When I started using Monarch, I was surprised at how much I was spending on food delivery. Now, I budget smarter, I save more, and instead of juggling multiple apps, Monarch gives me the big picture so I can plan my financial game plan with confidence. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Continuing now, segment 2 here on Locked On Commanders, getting into our OTA preview, looking at battles that are going to start taking shape here this week on Wednesday as the OTAs officially get started. Phase 3 of the Washington Commanders offseason program getting underway. And the next position group we're looking at is the defensive line group. The Commanders' defensive line is going to look a lot different this year, I believe. And honestly, that could be the key to fixing what ultimately was the defense's biggest weakness. Now, the contenders, I think on the surface, we would say Javon Kinlaw, Dietrich Wise, Eddie Goldman versus Daron Payne, Cleveland Ferrell, and Sheldon Day. But really, it's an open race as far as I'm concerned. No sacred cows on this team, right? That's how they put it. That's how I think we've heard 3 people. I think head coach Dan Quinn, general manager Adam Peters, assistant GM Lance Newmark. I think all 3 of those guys have said there's no sacred cows on this team at least once since we've gotten to know them, right? So if that's the case, then nobody on this defensive line is safe, quote unquote, as far as their job security and their positioning, right? Like, I don't think Johnny Newton is getting released, right? But can we say he's untouchable as a starter on this defensive line? No. If there's another guy out there that says, I deserve those reps, I'm going to show you I deserve those reps, and he does show that he deserves those reps, then darn it, he's going to get those reps, right? Priority number 1 for the defensive line, hold the line. That's your first priority. Hold the line of scrimmage. Do not give up ground. You know what I mean? If you can't eat ground, if you can't get into the backfield, at least hold your ground. The front four's primary job is to hold that line of scrimmage. Then you want to push it back, eat blocks, control gaps, stop runs from breaking through the line at the same time, free up second and third level blitzers to come in and make plays against the opposing quarterback. Last season, the Washington Commanders blitzed about 33% of their defensive snaps. That was ranked near the top of the league. Teams that blitz that often usually are relying on those blitzers having open running lanes. Those open running lanes come because the defensive linemen are holding their position, they're eating gaps, they're eating blocks, and they're opening those doors for their teammates. So you also see a lot of replacement coverage. Replacement coverage is when a defender, usually a defensive back, but not always, but a defender, you have a blitzer. Let's say you're Mike linebacker. Let's say Bobby Wagner is blitzing from the middle of the defensive formation. Then maybe you have a safety coming down into where he was, or you have another linebacker like Frankie Louvu rolling over to where he was. Someone is usually eyeing that position saying, if the quarterback does the old throw it where they ain't, which is throw the ball over the blitz, that's kind of the general cliche that comes with blitzing. If the quarterback does that, I'm going to be sitting on that and I'm going to be able to pounce on that ball. That's kind of what you're trying to do. Or the quarterback says, I know they like to replace those blitzers, so I'm going to hold the ball for a tick. And when I hold the ball for that tick, that's when the pressure gets there and I'm getting sacked. Either way, we're making money here as a defense if you get either of those productions. So in 2024, the Commanders ranked 5th in sacks per pass attempt. They got sacks on 8.67% of the dropbacks that they face. That put them among elite company defensively with teams like the Giants, the Texans, the Ravens, the Jets, the Chargers, and the Browns. And I know not all those teams were good, but their defenses were good. All right. All known again for having strong defensive units. So it's good company to be in. However, despite that pressure, Washington had the worst run defense among those teams. So the defensive front, not strong in all levels of the game, ranking 28th in yards allowed per carry. So if you can generate a top 5 pass rush and you can do it without a premier pass rusher, like how Dante Fowler and Frankie Louvu, while valuable, aren't considered elite edge rushers, they still combine for nearly 20 sacks. So it makes sense, actually, when you look at the defense targeted players at the front office, rather, target defensive players that can better hold the line this offseason, not necessarily get after the pass or the passer a little bit better. At least that's the hope, right? If you can stay about top 5 or 6 in sacks per pass attempt face, but get better at holding the line of scrimmage, better at stopping the run, then you have a net positive, even if you don't have a Myles Garrett or a Trey Hendrickson or a TJ Watt yet or at all. We'll see. So when you look in the new group here, who is likely to be the starter, right? The starting group. That's kind of what we're here to try to answer, right? When you look at PFF, true pass rush win percentage, true pass rush, true pass sets that you face according to PFF's algorithm and all that stuff. You get rid of the play action passes, you get rid of the screen passes, you get rid of those types of things that basically negate a player's ability to get after the quarterback before they ever have an opportunity to get out of the quarterback, right? So when you look at true pass rush win rates, the top guys, Eddie Goldman, Dorrance Armstrong, Javon Kinlaw, Dietrich Wise, Cleveland Ferrell, Daron Payne, Johnny Newton, Jalen Holmes, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Sheldon Day, Andre Jones, bringing up the rear. That's your order from top to bottom, best to worst, true pass rush win rate. 3 of the top 5 in that group are new players to this team. If Newton takes a step forward, then your best pass rushing front basically looks like Javon Kinlaw and Johnny Newton inside, Dorrance Armstrong and Dietrich Wise outside. Goldman is a guy who can plug a hole, but also cause some disruption if the offense tries to get cute and 3rd and 1, we're going to pass instead. Eddie Goldman might be out there for that 3rd and 1, big guy, gap eater. But guess what? If you decide to pass, he's also shown the ability. I mean, number 1 in true pass set rush win rate. He can get in the backfield. Doesn't get a lot of sacks, but he can get a lot of disruption. Run defense grades, a little bit different. 4 of the top 5 graded guys there are returning players. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Sheldon Day, Cleveland Ferrell, and Jalen Holmes. All 4 of those guys are top 4 in their run defense grades according to PFF last year. You might notice none of them starters this year, projected stars. Cleveland Ferrell starter last year, not projected to be a starter this year by most. Dietrich Wise is also in the top 5. He's obviously new, coming over from the New England Patriots. Missed tackle percentage from the lowest to the highest. 3 of the top 4 are young or new. Andre Jones, number 1 missed tackle percentage last year. Johnny Newton, 2nd best. Sheldon Day, 3rd best. Dietrich Wise, 4th best. Jalen Holmes, 5th best. You look at the end of that list. Dorrance Armstrong of this group, worst missed tackle percentage of the group. Eddie Goldman, 2nd worst. Daron Payne, 3rd worst. So the guys that have a little bit more experience actually were missing more tackles in 2024. Overall, when you stack and rack these guys, you quantify all these rankings that we just talked about, and you list them, your top 4 look like this. Dietrich Wise, Jr., Sheldon Day, Javon Kinlaw, and Cleveland Ferrell. So if you're stacking your starting defensive line just based on that quantifiable data, right? They're not stats. That's data. It's not stats. Analytics, whatever you want to call it. It's not stats. It's data. If you want to stack them from those top 4, that's your starting lineup. Dietrich Wise on one end, Cleveland Ferrell on the other, Sheldon Day, Javon Kinlaw on the inside. Now, obviously, you're going to have some rotations, some shifts, all that stuff, right? Your second 4, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Johnny Newton, Jalen Holmes, Eddie Goldman. Your first 3 outs would be Daron Payne, followed by Dorrance Armstrong, followed by Andre Jones Jr. So if you want to know who the 3 players that you have the most pressure on entering OTAs, entering training camp, I would say it's those 3 players, Daron Payne, Dorrance Armstrong, and Andre Jones. 2 of those 3 guys, Ron Rivera era guys. It just happens that way. What are we watching in OTAs? Group formations, expected to be varied, of course. The data doesn't paint the whole story. I'm not sitting here telling you that Sheldon Day is going to be a starting D tackle on this defense. But if he is, for some reason, if we come out on Wednesday and say Sheldon Day was getting first team reps, the data would support that decision, right? Now let's talk cornerbacks, a group the Commanders fans haven't fully seen yet. Marshon Lattimore, first full offseason with the team. Mikey Sanderstill, likely moving back inside. And Jonathan Jones and Trey Amos contending for that third starting spot. This rotation is wide open, so let's dive in next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The Commanders cornerback group entering OTAs has some familiar pieces, but it is a fresh puzzle that nobody has fully figured out yet. You got your three main names that everybody's talking about. Marshon Lattimore, the veteran, traded at the trade deadline from the New Orleans Saints to the Washington Commanders. He was mid-hamstring injury recovery. Look, everydayers, if you've been around since then, I tried telling you back then, don't expect him to start anytime soon. And I tried to tell you back then that I don't expect all-pro caliber Marshon Lattimore to show up. I will be honest, I expected a better Marshon Lattimore, especially once we got in the playoffs. I expected a better Marshon Lattimore, so I'm with you on that. But I think some expectations were just a little too high for a cornerback coming in midstream, dealing with an injury as it is. I kept saying this is about the future. Marshon Lattimore coming here is more about the future. Well, the future is here, right? So there's going to be no more defending Marshon from this program, at least. If he doesn't show up this season, I don't mean if he doesn't show up on Wednesday, like he's got to have 3 pick sixes on Wednesday. You know what I mean? Nothing crazy like that. But this starts it. This starts the first full year that he's going to have with the Washington Commanders, the first full offseason he's going to have with the Washington Commanders. It's incredibly important. So this version of Marshon Lattimore, we have not seen yet. The version of Marshon Lattimore we saw was a guy who had training camp, OTAs, offseason programs, all this stuff with the New Orleans Saints, came into the Commanders and tried to adapt on the fly. It worked in some areas, didn't work in some others. This version of Marshon Lattimore, now we're going to fully ramped up, fully prepared, fully trained, fully acclimated version. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is who you traded for if you're Adam Peters. So this is where you're going to see what that return on that trade really comes into. Trey Amos is looking to prove everybody right that he is guilty of being stolen, right? Considered one of the biggest steals in the NFL draft this year. This is where he gets to start showing everybody that they were right about that. Not the one day where he's going to prove it completely, not the one day where he's not going to prove it completely, but you start to look for some signs there. Mikey Sanderstill looks like he's moving back inside, so we're going to keep an eye out, obviously, for that and see what that looks like. Also, how's Noah Igbenogany? How's Jonathan Jones going to factor into this? What are we watching for OTAs? Lattimore and Sanderstill / Jones, I think, are your first three. I think, obviously, Marshon is outside, but I think Mikey and I think Jonathan Jones, basically, they're your inside-outside starters. Depending on the look, depending on the alignment, they might be inside, they might be outside. Doesn't really matter. Until Trey Amos is ready to step up into the starting lineup, I think those are going to be your starting three: Marshon, Mikey, and Jonathan Jones. Sanderstill and Jones, like I said, swapping nickel corner snaps, doesn't really matter. Maybe not 50-50. Again, I think a lot of it's going to be formational, situational, things like that. Okay, so that's what we're looking for from the cornerback position. But we're watching more. Wide receivers and running backs. We're looking for growth signs out of Luke McCaffrey. Ja'Cory Brooks, undrafted free agent, generating a lot of buzz. Could be pushing for a back-end roster spot, so we're going to be looking for him. At running back, 7th rounder Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt brings versatility, special teams value, which could give him an edge in a crowded backfield, so we're going to be looking for that. Chris Rodriguez Jr., Jeremy McNichols, how are they going to step up to the presence of Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt? Are they going to come out and compete with their hair on fire? Are they going to come out and roll over and say, all right, one of us is probably getting cut, one of us is probably on the practice squad? How does Brian Robinson respond to an offseason of everyone talking about him being replaced and or traded? We're going to talk more about that later. And, of course, our first look at Deebo Samuel playing football with the Washington Commanders. Oh, and we can't forget jacked Jayden Daniels, right? It's been all the buzz. Jayden Daniels putting on some muscle. So we're going to be looking out for that too. So a lot to look out for at OTAs. And honestly, we didn't even talk about every single thing. That's a wrap on today's deep dive. However, plenty to watch as these battles take shape at OTAs beginning on Wednesday. We'll keep you locked in every step of the way. Coming up next on Locked On Commanders, what about all this Brian Robinson talk? We just mentioned it, right? Is it valid or is it disrespect? We're going to dive into that question with the use of film to support our conclusion in the next episode of Locked On Commanders. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, you can text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/Locked On Commanders. You'll get access to me, the show, and information that goes beyond our 5 episodes per week. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. As training camps get closer and roster moves keep coming, they'll help you stay the most informed NFL fan around. You can find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day. Everydayers, I appreciate you showing up like you always do. Until next time, be safe, be kind, and I'll see you back here for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.